Speaking of cool, though, the day we're recording this, Thursday, April 6th, I lost track of months. We had a
Is
really
it cool out there in AZ?
I'm not in Arizona.
In M?
It's actually really hot right now. It's killing me that I don't have my fan on. I'm burning alive.
And also, I didn't technically say you were in AZ. I was just asking what the weather was like in Arizona.
I have no idea. I'll ask Jessica Negri next time I
Jared,
talk to her.
How's it feel over in Wyoming? I don't
empty
know. I'm
and
not
void.
there.
And anyways, we had a really cool announcement today by way of Xbox through Digital Foundry on Eurogamer.net. Dom, hit us with that good news.
Hit us with that good.
That good.
Let me pull up the. Well, first let's say what it is. Xbox Scorpio. We still don't have a name. Basically, the specs were completely unveiled today. We didn't see the box. We didn't see any games per se, but we do have like the complete technical breakdown of what's in this thing.
Which is weird. It's kind of the opposite of how it would usually be, right? You'd usually get
they,
all that other stuff, and then they would give you the tech breakdown.
Yeah, and they let this come out through like Digital Foundry and Eurogamer.
Through articles, yep.
Through articles. So they know that the people who are most interested in this stuff are the people, looking at these outlets. And then, the more general crowd is going to see the E3 stuff they end up showing. We'll get into that in a minute, though. So I just want to run through the specs and kind of what they mean really quickly. So the CPU is the same kind of 8-core AMD Jaguar ordeal. So it's actually only very slightly higher clock than the PS4 Pro CPU, which that doesn't really matter because the CPU doesn't bottleneck games in any way. So that's a good spot for them to save money in the cost of this thing. So it's the GPU that is, I think, roughly, I can spit out all these numbers, 40 compute units at 1172 megahertz and yada yada. Basically, it's close to, twice as powerful as the PS4 Pro. Maybe not quite twice as powerful, but that's where everything
1.5 times maybe.
Yeah, that's where everything we care about is driven from. So all that GPU power.
And that's how you're going to get, if you have enough power there, that's going to give you that native 4K without a bunch of frame dips, right?
So they also have now 12 gigabytes of RAM instead of 8, which is interesting because usually even at high res games don't usually use too much RAM, but I'm sure there's a good reason for that, and it'll be taken advantage of.
4 dedicated to system, 8 dedicated to games.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a good spot to settle at, being kind of this pro console, because obviously we already have the 8 cores, and 16 might be a bit overkill, so I think 12 is probably a good settling spot.
Yeah. My only point was they probably could have went with 8 and been fine and had the cost savings, but it looks good on the spec sheet compared to everything else.
Yeah, it would look bad on the spec sheet, yeah.
The other one that's really important that a lot of people might look over is the memory bandwidth. So you can have a really great GPU, but if this bandwidth, if you can't pass enough data along, then it doesn't do you much good. So they have 326 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, which is about 30% better than the PS4 Pro. So that is really important for the 4K resolution and textures and everything too. So that's going to be a big thing for it. 1 terabyte hard drive, and then as speculated, a 4K Blu-ray drive, which is just like the S. I think is going to prove to be an advantage for them.
They're not going to, fuck that up. Obviously, with them already having it in the S.
So Digital Foundry, they got to see Forza run at native 4K 60 FPS, which is a really good sign. But then again, it's generally known racing games are easier to run, and of course it's an Xbox game, so it's super well optimized. That being said, given these specs, I'm not super technical, but it seems pretty safe to say that every game, will be able to run at 4K and minimum 30 frames per second. That seems to be the consensus that, and every developer is going to be able to do what they want differently. Maybe one developer wants it at 1080 with 200 frames a second. I guess that would be up to them.
Also,
that wouldn't make any sense, but
I believe they said too in one of the articles, because there's multiple articles, they did a deep dive into the specs and stuff.
Yeah.
And you can correct me on the specifics, Dom, but in one of the articles it states that every Xbox One game, because obviously Xbox One games play on this, because it is an Xbox One, all the games will have the menu available that you guys had told me about that PS4 Pro has, where you can choose, do you want 60 FPS and lower performance, or lower frame rate and higher performance, you know what I mean?
That's just specific game menus.
It's up to the devs.
Yeah, that's not on I'm just saying it's not through the PS4 UI, even though it's worth noting it does have boost mode.
But they've stated through that article, Microsoft said that if your game gets performance enhanced or not, if it's going to be on the Scorpio or playable on the Scorpio, it's going to have those settings available for all the games.
Yeah. So that's a good sign. So I mean, what I draw from this is they're going to call it X Beast, as I predicted, because this thing is a beast. Hopefully it comes in at $500 or less. I think that should be doable, but it's tough to say. But
I'm thinking $600 for this, man.
No, I don't think it's over $500.
You gotta hope not. But for me,
how are they selling it at $500? I mean, it would have to be a loss, and then they would have to just kind of work with it for a while.
I mean, I see it as possible. So the GPU they used in this is equivalent to a NVIDIA 1070, which goes for on the smaller end about $300. So they could have $200 or so into everything else, because that GPU is going to be their most expensive piece, especially when it's the same CPU they've been using. And of course they're buying things in bulk and a little bit more memory, but overall I think 500 is possible, and preferably less if they can figure it out. But
so Jared, is what you were just saying more like where games would have to be updated, like a PS4 Pro patch, or all Xbox One games will be able to run in 4K?
I don't. This is the tough thing, because I'm not like the technical guy. But the article I was reading, the way Digital Foundry worded it is that every game that maybe isn't backwards compatible, but every game that's like an Xbox One game up, right? Every one of those games will have a menu in which they didn't say inside the game or through the actual just architecture of the Xbox. Will have a menu in which you can,
for example.
Yeah, so if you put in Quantum Break into the Project Scorpio, it'll have a menu in which you can choose if you prioritize frame rate or you prioritize graphic fidelity. Like, there will be options for you outside of because there will be the option for it to get upscaled or to run in 4K in that update. But if those aren't available, it'll still have a settings menu in which you can optimize to use the power of the Scorpio to fix games that aren't necessarily getting updated. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I go back to what Phil Spencer has said, I think like 2 or 3 times now, that basically they're just giving the devs all this power, and it's really up to them to use it as creatively as they want. But
Yippee.
What I'm gathering is like every dev will have the ability, the opportunity to make their games native 4K. I doubt there will be kind of the inverse of the PS4 Pro, where most games are just short of full 4K. I think it'll be the opposite, where most games will hit it. Maybe Cyberpunk can't quite do it, or something on that scale, because those games, CD Projekt Red games, are usually hyper demanding. So, but for the most part, I think this is a good sign. I think they're going to live up to the branding of true 4K, etc. So hopefully the price is good and they get some more exclusives to go with it. So
I want to say a few things about this. I want to say this. I am now that we have looked at the specs, and we'll say this. I have a friend in Dom who knows PCs enough to where I trust his knowledge, and you're saying it's not bullshit. They're going to be able to run 4K at least 30 smooth. So I am now day one for this bad boy, as long as it's not over $600. Not only that, but you guys know how much I love PlayStation, how into PlayStation I am. We're looking at a possible situation at the end of 2017, boys, where I could be playing basically only my exclusives, only Sony exclusives on PS4 Pro, and then
your third parties?
Really splitting my third parties between what I want on my Switch and what works, like the big AAA games that are going to be best in 4K on my Scorpio.
I think a lot of people might follow that too.
Yeah. So really quick, I want to throw in a couple of things. One, I want to read a quote from Mike Ibarra, who's the vice president for Xbox and Windows gaming platform.
Mike Ibarra.
Before that, I actually saw an article before we went live to record from gamesindustry.biz stating that analysts, which take their word with a grain of salt, analysts are always wrong. They're just professional guessers for the most part. They stated, based on today's announcement of just the specs alone, barring catastrophic software where there's nothing there, they readily expect Xbox to outsell PlayStation in this fiscal year, in 2017 to 2018. Interesting stuff there.
Jeez,
anyways, that's all.
That's big. If that is true, that's huge.
So according to Ibarra, Microsoft was in part motivated by a desire to win developers back after the launch of the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One in 2013. This after a reversal of the developer relationship it enjoyed during the Xbox 360 PS3 era. This is his quote, "The team looked back at the developers and the developer relations we have," Ibarra said. "With Xbox 360, we had absolute best platform for developers. With Xbox One, we sort of lost that in a 2-year time frame. So we said, how do we get the mind share of those developers back? We want the best games running on our box, and there are tools, dev kits, and some arrows like that to win the developers back. So that was a big priority for us as we approach this product." Ibarra's comments bring to mind Sony's strategy for the PS4. Following a post-mortem of the PS3, which many multi-platform developers found tricky to work with compared to the Xbox 360, Sony decided to focus on delivering a high-spec console that was easy to develop for. "I think of it as a supercharged PC architecture, and that's because we have gone in and altered it a number of ways to make it better for gaming." That's what Mark Cerny said back in 2013 when they announced the PlayStation 4. "We have unified memory which certainly makes creating games easier. This was the number one feature requested by the games companies." And yeah, they basically said, Ibarra said, "We have to win the hearts and minds of developers. We have the right tool sets that lets them bring their games across the whole family of products and let them create the absolute best versions of those games." So from everything we saw, it seems like that's Xbox's direction.